All right. Hey, welcome everybody to BSE 308. John Shutsky here, course instructor. This is module 1.2. Obviously, as I've talked about, I would much prefer to be doing this in person. I'm actually kind of chilled out here in a nice soft chair waiting for surgery next Wednesday, March 5th. So this is actually the day that I would normally be giving this lecture, March 5th. It's a couple days. I'm actually recording this on a Sunday. So hopefully this will be useful for you. I would really like for you to watch this presentation in its entirety. And I have kind of a cool homework assignment for you to work on. I think it will be interesting for you, and I think it'll be kind of fun. And that assignment for the March 5th for module 1.2 will actually be due on Friday night rather than Thursday night. That's the normal due night. If I do a lecture on Wednesday, typically the actual assignment's due on Thursday, but this one will be due on Friday. That would be what? That would be March 7th. So I'm going to flip over here to my PowerPoint, and today what we're going to be doing is talking about big picture challenges. And I will be perfectly honest with you. This is a really difficult lecture to give this year. It's been difficult ever since, quite honestly, COVID. The first year we were actually in the middle of COVID when BSE 308 was going on was 2021, even though the pandemic had been going on for a full year at that point. But some of the things that I talk about or have talked about since around 2016, I've always been a very optimistic person. And one of my reasons for optimism is the work of engineers and scientists. And I guess what I really want to be able to communicate with you here today is that engineers and scientists really kind of hold the key to the future. And specifically, obviously, as a person in an engineering department, I feel strongly about the role of engineers. And I just want to acknowledge a lot of the uncertainty that exists in our world right now. There's a lot of polarization. We'll talk about that a little bit. But overall, I guess I want to say that a lot of the general, the big picture trends that I'll be talking about are still moving forward as we move into the future. So big picture challenges and your opportunity to make a difference. Now, let me just give you a couple of just reminders here. So this presentation assumes, first of all, that you have reviewed and you understand all the syllabus content. That includes all the assignments, the 3 big assignments. Any expectations that I have obviously are in the syllabus and from that first lecture. And then we're going to review that Friday assignment, the one that's going to be due on Friday versus Thursday. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So some big ideas. Number one is I believe we've progressed in some ways on really big issues that positively will affect humanity in the future. But as I talked about, we've slid backwards and we've made little progress in a few areas. The 2020 to 2022 global pandemic was a pretty big disruptor. It had a lot of implications. Most of you were high school students at that time, possibly even middle school. So you know what I'm talking about, the disruption that occurred with businesses, with schools, with students, with families. And today, some of that uncertainty continues even today. So we want to talk about that. Things are complex. We've got war, we've got conflict, we've got division, we've got a lot of politics that are happening right now. And part of that is leading to a lot of polarization. But sometimes when we go through these times of major disruption, sometimes change happens for the good. And I want you to think about and empower you as an engineer, engineers, technology people, science people, and also human relationships will really play a role in our future advancement. And I also want to say that as an engineer, you have an opportunity to design that positive future. You can also design your life. You can design your career. So I really want you to take seriously the idea of taking your engineering skills, your science skills, your knowledge, your ability to organize information, and hopefully in the future, it's people like all of you who are in this class that will really lead us toward a more positive future. So again, I want to just kind of go back in history. I actually first took this screenshot. This was 2020. BSC 308 used to be a full 16-week class, so we would typically begin right after Martin Luther King holiday. So back in 2020, you could see there were a lot of things going on, even back before the pandemic really got going. Kobe Bryant had just been killed in a helicopter crash. President Trump back in 2016 or back in 2020 was wrapping up his 4th full year as the president. So a lot of different things going on. There was a big election that happened in 2020. And interesting, if you look over the left-hand side, oh my goodness, we had just had our 4th U.S. coronavirus case confirmed in California. And we were just beginning to recognize, like, wow, this is actually potentially a really big deal and could really make a big impact on our country. This is from last year. So again, you see, like, every year there are things going on. 2024 was obviously an election year. We had the big outbreak of the war. You see in the upper left-hand corner, Hamas says there's been no breakthrough after Biden says there's a ceasefire. So this kind of stuff is always happening. It's always going on. It always seems a little bit chaotic. It always seems a little bit frenetic. I think this is one from just a couple of weeks ago. The Delta plane in Toronto had just landed and flipped over. Even to this date, I don't know if we know exactly why that had happened. But again, things are kind of always happening. But what I want to emphasize to you, and what I've talked about in past lectures, is we still are making advancements as human beings. As a civilization, we're continuing to advance in some really key and really important areas. This is actually from The Atlantic magazine back in 2015. So this is now almost 10 years ago. And The Atlantic had a huge article, December 18, 2015. By the way, you can go to the library and look this up if you'd like to. I could also make it available if anybody's interested. But this article was really cool because it talked about the advances that we were making around things like hunger and health and poverty and freedom and education, including the importance of educating women and girls in developing areas of the world. And a lot of these trends, if you look globally, a lot of these trends have continued here into 2025, despite some of the setbacks that we've had. Another series of articles, this is from 2018, about 3 years after, about 7 years ago now, 23 charts and maps that show the world is getting much, much better. And where these kind of break down, this is an article from an organization, a website called Vox, V-O-X. They talked about 9 like kind of primary ways the world is getting better. And that's where those 23, I mentioned those 23 charts that they have on the Vox website. They focused in these areas. They focused in areas like famine and hunger, fewer deaths from war. Yeah, it's been pretty traumatic here the last couple of years with the war in Gaza, with the things that are going on with Ukraine and Russia. But overall, as a global population, that trend is toward fewer deaths related to war or caused by war, fewer deaths from natural disasters. So again, like we think about all these things happening, all the hurricane damage that happened last year, the wildfires in California, there are still things happening, but because of engineering and technology advances, even though there are changes, by the way, in natural disasters, they're occurring more frequently and of greater severity, we are able to better protect people because some of the design efforts that engineering people are involved with. Progress against disease. And I'm going to talk about that here in a few minutes. That's actually one of the areas that I have focused my work in. Historically, are the diseases and health conditions that are related to agriculture and food systems. An example of that right now that I'm actually really quite concerned about is H5N1. We know that bird flu, avian influenza, the particular strain being H5N1, is having a big impact on poultry and specifically chickens and turkeys and ducks and egg production. So if you've purchased eggs recently, you probably know eggs are like, if you go to Woodman's or Metcalf's or any of the co-ops, eggs are like $8 a dozen. And part of that is because of animal diseases. So we're going to talk about that. Overall, greater life expectancy. But again, going back to the years of COVID, there's been some setbacks in that. There have been setbacks in things like not only physical health, but also mental health. which is something that we really need to keep our eye on. Again, overall in the world, if you look at the historical trends for the last 25 to 50 years, more democracy, expanding rights for women and sexual minorities. Again, I know that some of you are probably thinking, yeah, that's kind of like been set back, right? Yeah, you're probably right. There are some things that are kind of now beginning to go against these trends, but I'm optimistic for the future. Poverty, people living in fewer or on fewer than $2 a day, greener energy. So overall, we have shown, maybe this is the way I should talk about it, we have shown our ability to move in positive directions in many of these areas. While we have had setbacks, while we're always going to have times and politics and people and events that are going to happen in the world, I think we need to be thinking about that long-term trajectory, the things that are happening. And let me just go back to my PowerPoint here. Let me just give you a few examples. Overall, famine. If you think about famine, look at the trend here. Back in the 1800s, the early 1900s, even until like 1960 or 1970, we saw this gradual decrease in the number of people across the planet dying due to famine. That's the rate. So obviously the population is increasing, but the rate of people dying from famine decreasing dramatically. Again, as I talked about, the pandemic, a major disruptor, major economic impacts. It exposed a lot of the divisions in our country that I think are probably going to take another several years to really figure out and heal. A lot of chaos coupled with some polarizing, I should say extremely polarizing events. But again, the idea of this is we are generally heading in the right direction. The other thing that I want to emphasize to you is we know what the issues are. We know what the issues are that impact humanity. This is kind of a big picture perspective. If you go to the United Nations and you look at they call them the Sustainable Development Goals. We have things like poverty, hunger, health, public health, and also human health overall, education, gender equality, clean water, energy, so affordable and clean energy. You can read the rest of these, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities. So again, do these things sound familiar? If you are studying in biological systems engineering, these are the things we work on, right? We work on water. We work on feeding people. We work on the design of facilities and systems that impact our natural resources. It's the same if you're civil or you're mechanical engineer or you're biomedical. Your work impacts and will continue throughout your career to impact these big, massive, important goals of sustainability that we face as a world. Again, identified in this particular case through the United Nations. Your work as engineers and scientists will be vital and absolutely critical to the future of the success of our world. Here's just another way to look at it. Again, you can look at these, you can go into more detail. There's a lot of ideas here for, projects and design ideas if you're interested in, design courses or special projects and those kinds of things. Just a lot of opportunity to make a difference in our world. And again, a lot of it, I'm putting a little bit of a promotion here for my department, Biological Systems Engineering. We work like front and center in almost every one of these particular areas that you see here on this slide. So our history, we've shown in our history, you go back to that Atlantic article from 2015, those charts that are on the Vox website. History has shown we can make progress. We can do better, and I can guarantee you we will do better in the future, but we need people like you. We need engineers, we need problem solvers, we need people who can build relationships. It's all a bit confusing. I do know that. I will admit it to you. I think in many ways, things feel a little bit screwed up right now, but we have shown that we can do huge things in the past. The future is going to be complicated. Engineers are needed now more than ever before. We will do better. And I think it's important that you keep that long view for hope, because we're going to do awesome things in the future and you all have to be part of it. So you might ask, why? Shutsky, how can you be so optimistic, right? Given all of the things that are happening. And I want to just unpack a few things here for you. I've talked about this already. I think, and I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to say, engineers have the ability to solve problems using science and logic and creativity. And engineers and scientists tend to be very organized in their thinking, very objective. And so therefore, I think you kind of hold the keys. Engineers and scientists hold those keys for the future. You have to take advantage. You have to be able to go out and you have to understand and be hopeful and be forward thinking. But again, I think that you will play a hugely important role. And the second part of that, and that's why we spend so much time in our program, actually in all of the engineering programs that are ABET accredited, there's a lot of emphasis on teamwork, right? Some of you probably get tired of working on teams, but part of the whole idea of engineers working together on teams is we have to be very purposeful about building human relationships. We all know of people who are really awesome engineers or mathematicians or people, maybe students who get really awesome grades that have no people skills. And it's really going to take both. It's going to take those people skills, the ability to build human relationships, along with the engineering skills and attributes of solving problems and being organized and objective. And then the final thing is technology. Now, I'm actually going to talk a little bit in here about artificial intelligence. And I talked about that a little bit, or will talk about that when I go through the syllabus. We are in the middle of an absolute revolution with respect to artificial intelligence. That not only includes ChatGPT, but that includes things like agents and the ability to turn over a lot of very complicated, very mundane tasks to digital technology, to AI, to machine learning, to agents, and other forms of these different technologies. And that's going to help us in the future. It's also something that's going to present us with a lot of risk, right? I mean, big time risks. We have to be careful. We have to be diligent. We need to be thinking about risk assessment and safety. That's a bit of the work that I do. Not necessarily the safety related to large language models, but the safety related to autonomous agricultural equipment. But I think that technology is going to play a big role in that future to help us make sure that we ensure that great future that I still think we can achieve in the future. So let me talk a little bit about the assignment here for today. And it kind of picks up a little bit on some of the things that I'm talking about. So the assignment that it will be due on Friday at 11:59 p.m., a minute before midnight, is here's what I want you to do. I want you to bring your professional hat, whether you're a BSc major or chemical engineer, civil engineer, mechanical, whatever it is you do. You could also maybe be a business major or somebody who's in one of the other sciences. And I want you to think about and envision something that you will be involved or maybe would like to be involved in creating in the future. Again, it doesn't have to be engineering design. It could be a scientific breakthrough, but something that you will be involved with envisioning and creating and bringing to fruition in the future. It could be a machine, it could be a device, it could be a system, it could be an organization, it could be a collection of people who are all working together for common good in a certain area that doesn't exist today. And what I'd like for you to do, here's what I want you to do. I want you to describe it in a couple of paragraphs. What is this organization? What is it that leads you to think that maybe 10 years from now, and by the way, that's the time frame I'd like for you to look at. Think out 10 years from now, here is why this thing or this organization or this device or this machine, here's why it's important, and here's what it will look like in the future, okay? So I want you to be imaginative, and I want you to describe it in a paragraph, and I also want you to show it. I want you to show it either through a sketch or a mock-up or a crude prototype or some other type of like tangible depiction. When I say tangible depiction, that could be a flow chart. It could be some type of graphical representation that helps us to understand what it is you're talking about. I would like for you to be creative. This is one where I'm going to give you like full authority and I would actually encourage you to use generative AI, especially for the visualization, but it might also be something that you've got a couple of ideas and you ask an AI, you ask a large language model to help you think about, what are some ideas? Maybe help you brainstorm a little bit on what some of those future things could be that you could work on that would solve the problems that you are most passionate about. By the way, if you do use AI, explain how you used it, what you did. I'm actually going to give you an example. I took a course a couple of years ago. It was actually a little bit more than a year ago. I'm just going to go to my PowerPoint only on this. And that course was taught by a group called the Institute for the Future. If you ever have a chance to interact with them, they're called IFTF, Institute for the Future, and I took a class on envisioning new positive futures. And so one of the things that we spent a whole week talking about the issue of climate migration. So climate migration, just try to be quick here. Climate migration is occurring where we have parts of the world where the climate is becoming either unlivable or economically unsustainable for individuals and for families. There's parts of like Central and South America where this is occurring. Actually, a lot of the pressure down on the southern border from Mexico into the US, a lot of those people are actually being driven in part due to climate migration. And in this country, it's viewed as a negative, right? So immigration right now, there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of politics. So one of the things that we envisioned in this class was thinking about different cultures coming into different parts of rural states or rural areas of states like Wisconsin. And the vision that we had is building community, building culture, embracing people based on their cultural identity through food. And so we designed kind of a reconfigurable thing that, one day we could use it as a pizza oven, next day we could use it as a way to cook fresh foods from, areas of Mexico or South America or Indian food or Chinese food. So there's a couple of different renditions. The picture on the bottom looks a little wild and crazy. So this is this big reconfigurable cooking device that can be like remade from night to night. And you see all these people dining together. And the other thing that we described is a language using artificial intelligence support and capability so that a chef from China, a chef from India, a chef from Mexico could communicate together, they could cook together, they could build community and relationships together using artificial intelligence to bridge those language-based barriers. So again, this is the kind of thing I'm encouraging you to think about. It can be wild and wacky. It can be something that seems kind of crazy on the surface, but this is how the future gets created. And so I want you to travel to the future, think about this artifact from the future, bring it back into class through your writing and some type of visual depiction. And again, that's why I'm giving you an extra day. I would like for you to spend a couple of hours really thinking about this. And hopefully this will be a fun and kind of an exciting opportunity to think, to envision a different future, to be positive, and again, use those skills and ideas and creativity and innovation that you have as an engineer. So let me jump back in. Let me talk about some of the big things that I do worry about. These are things I do lose sleep about, and these are things that drive me in my work as a biological systems engineer. The first one is the whole notion of feeding people. So we have a big issue in this country. Within just a few years, by the year 2050, that's right now less than 25 years from now, we will have to feed more than 9 billion people. So currently in our country, we have more than 7 billion now. I think the number's pushing around 7.5 billion. We're going to have to grow to 9 billion based on current population trends. And so the question is, how are we going to feed all these people? How are we going to feed all these people in light of the different pressures that I'm going to talk about in upcoming parts of my lecture here? And the deal is, it's not only about feeding people, it's about, and by the way, let me just say, if you do the math, if you say 9 billion or 9.5 billion in the future, and currently here today we have 7.5 billion. We're going to make the math easy here. We have 7.5 billion people and we got to grow by 2 billion. So that's a 2 divided by 7.5. That's like 26, 27% population growth. That doesn't seem like a really big deal, right? Like, yeah, we can do that. But the other thing that happens is as populations grow and as populations become more affluent, as they become more wealthy, I'm just going to use the term wealthy, we also know that they demand more protein. And if you think about yourself as a college student, right? Like suddenly you find yourself with an extra $100 a month to spend on food, you're probably going to upgrade your diet. You're going to probably go for a little bit higher quality food. You're going to probably go for, if you're not a vegetarian, you're going to go for more meat products. You're going to probably maybe take yourself out to dinner. Typically what happens, and we know this through research, this is not debatable, that as people in the world get more wealthy, they demand more protein. And the thing about protein is protein requires a lot more input. So while we may only grow our population by 25 or 26 or 27%, that increase in population is also going to demand higher quality food, higher quality proteins, and that is going to place a bigger demand on the system. Number two is we also are going to most likely derive more of our energy from biological products, including products that could normally be used for food. So we're going to have to increase our agricultural production. So again, guess what? If you're working in mechanical engineering or biological systems or civil or whatever your engineering discipline, we're going to have to grow a lot more things. We're going to have to be thinking a lot more creatively about biology. We're going to have to be thinking a lot more creatively about engineering. How do we grow things in vertical structures? How do we produce crops and plants more in greenhouses? How do we, if we're producing animals, how do we do so in a way that's humane and safe for both animals and people? So again, the idea is we are going to grow our population by 26%, but we're almost going to have to double our total level of production. Down at the bottom, you see there's a little asterisk. The idea of doubling became popular in the early 2010s. Back around 2011, 2012, 2013, I did a number of presentations on this whole idea of doubling agricultural production. There's some people that say, it's probably not double. It's maybe more like 50, 55, 60%. But even that is going to be significant, especially given some of the headwinds that I want to talk about next. One of the headwinds that we're going to face is as we grow this population, the population in our world, as it increases, is not going to be equal across all parts of the world, right? So we know that there are parts of the world where the population is actually beginning to shrink. It's also aging. So there are parts of Asia where population is growing. There are other parts of Asia where the population is flat or even shrinking somewhat. So the key idea here is that population growth is going to be most pronounced in the areas of the world that we would consider to be less developed, less economically progressive, less technology focused. So a lot of population growth in parts of the world that are already having difficulty feeding themselves because of their level of economic development, because of their level of technology and education. These are also parts of the world that in some cases are dealing with conflict. So we know that population growth, hunger, food, agriculture is very much connected to a lasting world peace. And I just want to emphasize for you again, if you are in biological systems engineering, what do we do in that major part of what we do is we protect our water, we protect our natural resources, we design machines, and a big part of that is sustaining the environment through engineering, but part of it is also about feeding people. So in this field of work, again, I think it's all engineers in the College of Engineering at UW-Madison. You're going to be playing a role in the protection of world peace or the promotion of world peace through your role, and a big part of that will be based on food and hunger and some of those other sorts of things that are happening. Headwinds. So we got to grow. So let me just pause for a second. We got to feed a lot of people. We've got to double production, or at least increase it by 60%, give or take. And we're going to be doing all of this during times when we've got a lot of other challenges happening. One of those challenges is the increased influence of climate change. Now, I go out, I do a lot of talks, I speak to a lot of farmers and people who live in rural areas, and I tend not to use the terms climate change. I was really careful when I would talk to my dad. My dad was a farmer, by the way. And there were times when my dad would call me in the heart of the winter. You know, here in Madison, it might be 18 below zero, and my dad would call me and he'd say, "So John, how's that climate change thing working out for you?" And so there was kind of this little bit of tongue-in-cheek. I guess what I'm saying is there are a lot of people who we will be working with in the future who may or may not really understand, or they may or may not believe in climate change. You know, I'll tell you here in a few slides, it's real. What I can say, and I think what we can all agree with sort of definitively, is we are experiencing increased frequency, so happening more often, frequency, you know, the number of hurricanes per year, per decade, or whatever measure you use, the number of wildfires that are occurring annually, that's frequency. And the other thing is severity. So when these things do happen, even if it's the same number per year, the severity level is going up super dramatically with all of these types of natural disasters. What I tend to do when I'm out talking with my constituency group, I'm giving presentations, whether it's farmers or rural leaders or people who are on the board of companies or cooperatives, I talk about weird, wild, wacky weather, W to the fourth power. Everybody can agree with that. Things are crazy. Things are wild right now, and they are not going to get any better, at least within our lifetime. So these are things we're going to have to be thinking about mitigating, beginning to, like, can we turn the temperature down, proverbial, you know, not literally, but can we begin to do the things that will mitigate climate change, that will mitigate some of these long-term changes in our world? But also we're going to need engineers to adapt and adjust and develop the kinds of strategies so that we are able to still survive on this planet with all of these changes that are occurring. I unfortunately did not have the time to put a new slide together. So this is 2019, was the second hottest year on record. I believe if you go back to 2024, that was the hottest year on record. 23, the year before that was right there at the top. So if you look at the last 2 decades, the vast majority of the hottest years on record globally occurred here in the 2020s. Or at least since 2015 forward. You can look here in Wisconsin. There are all kinds of things that are happening. I might be showing you a slide here coming up. The number of days with ice over on Wisconsin lakes has shrunk even in the last 40 or 50 years by like 30 days. Like, that's really dramatic if you look at those kinds of long-term changes. So a lot of different things that are out there. Yeah, this is actually from 2024. NASA found 2024 was hotter than any other year on record. Previously, it had been 2023. So just a lot of things that are happening. This is not in your imagination. Climate change is real. If you would like to read or learn more about this, I have been very involved. I'm actually chairing the 2026 report for the WICI, for the Agricultural Working Group of WICI. So what's WICI? WICI is the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts. And the WICI group, it's not just agriculture. We talk in here about cities and municipalities and public health and human health and all of the different impacts on wildlife and forests and natural resources. So there's lots to learn. The WICI, if you just search WICI or go to wiki.wisc.edu, you can look at the 2021 assessment report, and I will be including a couple of these links in the Canvas if you would like to learn more. Again, I talked a little bit about water, talked about the frozen lakes in Madison, the fact that we have 30 fewer ice over days as compared to the early part of the 1960s. The other thing is we see in most parts of the world either way too much water, right? We see floods. We see the hurricanes that occurred, devastating places like North Carolina, parts of Florida, parts of Georgia. So oftentimes we see too much water. We also see drought. So we either see too much water, we see too little water, and then the other related impact is, water contamination. What do we do with all of this water in the event of floods, and how do we prevent impacts on the environment? Another headwind that we face is the whole notion of emerging infectious diseases. And the fact that 75% of the diseases that are beginning to cause troubles that are new are zoonotic. That means that they are diseases that can be transmitted from animals, including food animals like chickens and ducks and turkeys, or pigs and cows and sheep and other animal species. They can be transmitted from animals to people. So a perfect example right now is H5N1. In Asia, there have been historically outbreaks of H5N1 where we've seen it transmitted from birds to people and mutated in a way that it caused 50% human mortality. So that means that those people who got infected, 50% of those people died as a result of being infected with H5N1. Now, the H5N1 animal to human transmission, there have been a few cases here in the US in recent months. We have not seen anything close to this level of risk or mortality, but that's what we're concerned about, is the potential for one of these mutations to occur in a way where this disease becomes much more lethal for people. That's why chickens, when they are infected as a flock with H5N1, unfortunately have to be destroyed, because we don't want to see this disease spreading in either animal species or in human species, because the more it spreads, the more individual animals that are affected, the more chances this disease has for mutation. Animal diseases are constantly changing. There is an impact caused by climate change. Some examples include like Lyme disease. With climate change in Wisconsin, we see a lot more cases of Lyme disease, a perfect example of a zoonotic disease. Some other ones you may have heard about recently are Zika, influenzas. All of the influenzas ultimately have an animal connection, and also foodborne illness. By the way, you might ask about the influenza situation. This is a picture of a live animal market. You see here in the foreground chickens. To the left, you see ducks and geese and other animals. So this is common in various parts. This is actually in Vietnam, by the way, if I didn't mention that. So I had a project there years ago where I had a staff member who spent, actually, I think it was like 10 weeks in Vietnam working on the public health issue connected to controlling the spread of different influenzas from animals to people, knowing that this is where a lot of these influenzas originate and where they mutate. And the other thing I'll mention to you is if you get your flu shot, hopefully you all will get your flu shot. When you get your flu shot, we are going, when I say we, it's groups like CDC and the World Health Organization. They spend time in places like where you see on this slide, testing, collecting biological specimens from pigs and chickens and ducks, and they use that to formulate the next year's worth of influenza vaccine. All right, I can tell by my time here, I need to move a little bit more quickly. So again, to summarize, we got climate change, we have issues connected to water. This is actually just a picture of a market. We still really don't know with certainty. Coronaviruses typically have resided within animal populations in different parts of Asia. You might have heard of SARS, S-A-R-S, which was another form of coronavirus. So there's probably a pretty strong, at least initially, a connection with wildlife and with other animals. And again, the idea here, this is going to be an issue. We're going to have to be using engineering skills and technology and people working together and people in engineering working with our health community to be able to ensure a more sustainable, more healthy future. So let me kind of summarize. I've got a summary here for part one of my presentation. We've got a lot of challenging things that are impacting our planet. And we're in kind of an inflection point right now. While I'm positive about the future, we are going to have those challenges ahead if we want to create that positive path in the future. That includes this whole notion of having to feed 9.7 billion people. That includes more protein. That also includes biofuels, leading us to almost have to double production. And this feeding 9 billion people thing also has a connection to all of these headwinds that we're talking about. Climate change, water, animal disease, and a whole host of other things. Again, the idea with all of this is engineering is a key. So let's move on. And I want to talk a little bit about, so why am I so optimistic? I'm optimistic based on you all, based on your training, your education, your skills, your innovation, your youth, your ideas. But I'm also influenced by my thinking in terms of engineering and technology, including computers, vehicles, biological advancements. And part of that is this whole notion we continue to grow and expand our knowledge and capabilities exponentially through technology. I don't think I need to spend a lot of time talking about this. Typically, when we think about growing a business, growing a company, we oftentimes see linear growth, right? So in this case, we go from 80, if we add 80 every year, we go from 80 to 160 to 240 to 320, etc. I think about this like this is the way my dad, when my dad started farming back in the 1970s, he wanted to grow by like 80 acres a year. So this is what he did. And it took him like 8 or 9 years to go from his first 80 acres to 800 acres. Whereas exponential growth, in this particular case, we're talking about doubling. So instead of going from 80 to 160, we go from 80 to 160, but then we double that to 320, to 640, to 1280. This is the kind of growth that we see in technology. Specifically, I think you're all probably aware there's something in technology, in digital technology in particular, called Moore's Law. So Moore's Law, what it says is we are able to grow our computing capacity for the same cost, for the same investment. We're able to double our computing power and capability every 12 to 18 months. I would actually argue right now with generative AI and with machine learning, we're more than doubling it every 12 months. You all need to recognize that you have more computing power in your pocket. Most of you probably have either an iPhone or an Android. You have far and away more computing power in your pocket than existed in the whole world back in 1969 when we first sent people to the moon. Back in the Apollo missions, they were very dependent on technology and computing capacity. But compared to what we have today, it's just unreal what the individual person has access to. And then you start to think about the abilities you have through cloud computing and being able to access, whether it's the Microsoft Azure product or Amazon Web Services, where you can literally pay to access banks of computers. It's just absolutely astounding what we have access to. Back in 1961, if we were paying for the graphic processor that is in my iPhone, here I'm pulling it out. I know you can't see me on camera. Let me actually, my iPhone, I think this is an iPhone 15 if I'm not mistaken. If I had to pay in 1961 dollars for the graphic processor alone, in my iPhone, it would cost me $637 trillion. It's just absolutely amazing what we have access to. Again, now I said we have generative AI. These are things that we also have that now built into our phones, right? And soon we will, in all likelihood, I would say within the next 5 years, we will have something called artificial general intelligence. And that's probably beyond the scope of what we can cover here today, but you might want to look into that a little bit and do a little bit of reading about artificial general intelligence. So let me just talk a little bit about what does all this technology stuff mean, right? So we talk about exponential, we talk about doubling capabilities, we talk about AI. So I'm going to talk about 5 different big trends here, and I'm going to go quickly with this. The first one is big data. So we now have this ability to just constantly collect and generate just tsunamis of data. And it is driven by new data collection devices. We have these things on our phone and our smartwatches. And we have cameras on campus, right? Watching things. If you drive, any sort of vehicle that's got cameras, we're constantly collecting information. The engine in your car is collecting data. So we're constantly just always collecting data. These types of applications are also growing pretty dramatically in agriculture, where we can collect data from individual animals, from fields, from drones, from other types of devices. And now we're beginning to think about how can we use AI and machine learning. There have been a number of very promising applications. I would encourage you to look at the Canvas module. This is not required reading. Even in my area of work, I'm beginning to use AI. I've got a number of projects in this area. We are seeing tons of healthcare and biological applications. If you think about it, AI can process all of the cancer articles that get published in this country on an annual basis. We're talking about a couple 100,000 peer-reviewed scientific articles. It can process all of that data and all of that information in a matter of hours. And then from that begin to look at and develop and suggest patterns, new types of treatments, new drug formulations, combinations of treatment. So again, it's also been a big thing with vaccine development. This is having world-changing, it's unbelievable what is going to happen in the future. See, I got to put my picture back up here with Jarvis. So back when the Iron Man articles first came, the Iron Man movies first came out, I was enthralled by this idea of Jarvis. Having kind of a dashboard, having somebody you could talk to, somebody to help you make decisions, something that would constantly be looking at, generating and processing data and helping to make actions that were meaningful and accurate. And we're getting there. We're getting there a lot more quickly than what I would have ever recognized, but we are definitely getting a lot of potential. Like I said earlier, a lot of risk, but I think it is a space to really keep an eye on. One of the things that's happening with all of this is we see increased use in autonomy, autonomous vehicles, robots. We're now milking a lot of cows in Wisconsin with robots. In this particular case, an autonomous tractor. We have robots, UAVs, those are drones, unmanned aerial vehicles. The other thing that's happening is we're able to share resources. So what am I talking about here? It's sharing like a piece of agricultural equipment. You might wonder, well, like, okay, what's the connection? So this is like Uber, right? So I can share vehicles, I can share rooms. Airbnb is part of our sharing economy. And again, in the future, we will be able to better leverage the sharing of resources. And there's still going to be economic benefits for people, but we'll do it through a sharing economy that is enabled in part by digital technology. We talk about autonomy, we talk about robots, this little, about the size of a picnic cooler rolling through a field, this little robot. I've been involved with this project, a company called EarthSense, which is connected to the University of Illinois. This robot is rolling underneath a canopy of standing corn plants. In this particular case, it's collecting data based on pest presence. Are there insects? What's the spacing of the plants? But the other thing that this little robot can do is it can go underneath standing crops and it can spread what we call cover crops. So cover crops are different types of crops that are put into the soil. They grow, they cover the soil to help prevent erosion and protect water resources and all different kinds of things. Typically what we had to do in the past is wait till this corn got harvested and then go in and plow it all up, and now we can use robots for these kinds of tasks. And, and honestly, a whole bunch of other stuff. This is just one cool little video I've got. Lots of different things that are happening. I think this is the last trend that I have, and then I will wrap things up. We also are seeing changes in the workforce. So one of the things that we see happening is increased enrollment in places like engineering and the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences, where we see more diverse workforce. We see a lot more women in particular. I will just tell you, when I was a senior, I went to school at Purdue. Actually, my junior and senior years, we had one woman in the whole program. So I was in a class that had, I think, around 40, 45 students in total. We had one woman. Now, if we look at our department, and it's quite similar in biomed, chem engineering, mechanical, civil. There are a lot more women involved. And I think this is a really important trend. Why is that? And I want to say this. Guys, in no way does this diminish your role or the importance of men being involved in engineering. But we do know that in developing parts of the world, women make up almost half of the workforce. And we also know, when we think about feeding 9.7 billion people, in agriculture, when women have equal access to resources, that includes capital, cash, seed, machinery, land, water, their productivity is 30% greater than for men. I'm just going to leave it at that, to say that women are really, really important, that we need to make sure we have women participating equally in the workforce. We also know from studies of Fortune 500 companies that boards that have relatively more women compared to boards that don't, and when I say boards, I'm talking about like the board of directors for a large Fortune 500 company, the boards that have more women generate 42% greater return on investment. 42% greater return on sales, 53% return on equity. So it is absolutely vital that we continue to have a diverse workforce. When I think about, there's been a lot of conversation in the news in the last 2 or 3 months about DEI, and I think that that's unfortunate. We do know that having a diversity of thinking, of genders, of cultures, ways of thinking about the world and solving problems, that's an important part of what we need to do together. So again, this is something that gives me a great deal of optimism. My last, one of my last slides here is just kind of a summary. We are seeing rates of change like we've never seen before with digital technology, with diversification of our workforce. There are major applications. All these things we've talked about have major applications connected to biological systems engineering and all of the different disciplines that are represented here in BSE 308. Despite all the cool digital stuff, we still need people and we still need relationships, and that's just going to be really vital for the future. So let me wrap things up. Some keys to being successful. This is kind of connected to this lecture. This is also kind of general, I guess, life and career advice. Number one is to think about this stuff for the future. That's why I think it's really important that you do the homework assignment. You really give thought to that homework assignment that's due on Friday. Know where you're going. Also, at the end of this class, I'm going to ask you to develop a professional career plan. And that's part of it, is I want you to know where you're going, where you want to head in the future. Another thing that I think is really important for this class, but I also want to say it's important for life and in your careers especially, it's to show up. Showing up is like 80% of the battle. Showing up to meetings, showing up to team events, showing up to class, being present. It really, really does make a difference. I've been around for a while now, as you can guess, and I know that showing up is just really, really critical. By the way, perfection is not required. Simply being at the table, simply showing up is quite important. Number three, as I am preparing to do a pretty major surgery here in a few days, I could have prevented what happened. It was a dumb mistake. I tripped, I fell. This is stuff I talk about in my work all the time, is like safety and that sort of thing. The one good thing that I will tell you is I do take care of myself. So my recovery, I know, is going to be fast. It's going to be quick. I exercise. So take care of yourself. When you take care of yourself, physical activity, the things you put into your body, whether that's the food you eat, the hydration, substances and things like that, be aware that it does have an impact on your future. So make sure that you take care of your physical health as well as your mental health. Another thing I'm going to say is to make sure that you never pass up a chance to give back to others. And then the last thing is always be a learner. So that's one of the things I want to encourage you to do in this class, is to constantly be thinking about learning. What can you do to learn about this world that I've presented to you today, these opportunities, these cool things that are happening, along with some kind of scary things. But I know that together we're going to make a difference. And I'm quite confident that the role of people here at UW-Madison who are passionate, who have strong problem-solving skills and that ability to form and maintain relationships, you're going to be a key to our future. So thank you for watching this. I hope you have a good time doing that homework assignment, and I hope to see you sooner rather than later, okay?